All right, we're going to continue looking at the rest of the rights of the accused once I get started. Earlier we were doing the Fourth Amendment. Now we're going to go on to the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment is now in the process. The Fourth Amendment dealt with interaction with the police. The Fifth Amendment is now after you've been placed under arrest. These are all your rights, and the first and the most important, of course, is your right to due process. And the right to due process means that, number one, that the law that the police have used against you is legitimate law. Number two, by the way, never use ignorance as an excuse. I didn't know what the speed limit was. Oh, that's not the way it is. Judges really don't like to hear that and really kind of disregard it. Number two, that the enforcement is correct. No racial profiling, no age profiling, no gender profiling, something like that. They have to have a legitimate reason to enforce that law. And then, of course, number three is the right to a trial, which we talked about yesterday with your criminal trial, and we'll see that much more in the next amendment, all the rights that you gain at a trial. Of course, derived from this is the Miranda rights. The most importantly that come out of the Fifth Amendment is your right to remain silent. You do not have to answer police questions. Now, keep in mind, if you're being placed under arrest, the myth is, they have to read your rights or you get away with everything. You don't. Reading your Miranda rights means that you have the right to remain silent if the police ask you questions. You do not have to answer those. And you can ask for an attorney. So that's a reminder, but they're obligated to remind you of the rights that you're learning right now. Also, that the evidence that they're being used, you have to be told of your evidence. You also have to be told of what crime you're being arrested for. It can't be just a guess. They have to tell you what they're stopping you for. One trick police officers will do is they'll ask you, do you know why I pulled you over? If you say, I was speeding, well, then they can hold you accountable for speeding because you've just admitted to it. So there's no point in even going to court because you've just confessed to the crime. So whenever asked, no, officer, I don't. Please tell me what you believe or what you suspect I did. That's just a rule of thumb. You cannot be tried for the same crime twice. If you're found innocent of a crime, the police cannot find more evidence and want to try to charge you again. So that's always a protection from the government continuing to come after you time and again until they get it right. Private property, it's actually, it's called eminent domain. You have the right to your own private property. The government can take it from you if there is a legitimate reason, either the federal or the state, to use that for the benefit of the community, and they also have to give you market compensation for that property. The best example up on 40-foot road there in Talmenson used to be one lane each way coming off the highway. It was very congested. There were about 4 houses that did not want to sell their property, and finally the government claimed eminent domain. They gave them just compensation so that they could widen those roads, so it was a lot easier for traffic. And while those people protested, the rest of the community saw the benefit of having the extra roads, and so the government claimed eminent domain in that area. Like I said, I am reiterating the right to remain silent there. When stopped by the police, you do not have to answer their questions. Unfortunately, sometimes that can be viewed as guilt, and sometimes they're going to keep you there longer. So it's always beneficial. Don't try to get into the game with them of I know my rights, because they know them too, and it doesn't always work out for yourself in the end. Of course, one of the biggest examples that we talk about the Fifth Amendment is your Miranda rights. The case of Miranda versus Arizona, where Ernesto Miranda was confessed to committing crimes, eventually went to the Supreme Court, where he said the police had tricked him. He did not know his rights, and they had tricked him into a confession. Now, granted, he was still guilty, and they convicted him anyway, but what this basically did was enforce to the police that they have to remind anybody that if they're being questioned, that they do have the right to remain silent, and they don't have to answer questions if they choose not to. And number two, they have the right to an attorney at any point. And if someone asks for an attorney, verbally have to ask for an attorney. But if you ask for an attorney, that the police are obligated to stop questions then until you have spoken to an attorney. Now, if they continue asking questions after you've asked for an attorney, then all those questions actually are not allowed in court. So the police are not going to do that because they want to try to obviously get as much evidence against you as they can. Kind of briefly explaining what I just went over with double jeopardy. And if you look up the Casey Anthony case, you'll understand why we talk about that. Again, the evidence that's going to be used against you, and of course telling you what your crime is, your right not to speak, pleading the fifth. That can also take place in court as well. So whether you're being questioned by police or questioned in the courtroom, you do not have to admit guilt. All right, jumping on to our Sixth Amendment. Like I said, the Sixth Amendment is going to deal more with your rights in the courtroom. Now you've been arrested, and now it comes down to court time. And the first right is one of the most well-known. It's the right to a fair and speedy trial. The government cannot keep you incarcerated for a length of period of time. Usually most trials in the criminal justice system, PA, is 9 to 12 months. That's about the average. So that keeps you from sitting in jail for an extensive period of time. You also have the chance for bail, if that's possible, depending on your crime and depending on how much money you have to be able to pay that. The trial must be public. It must be on public record. So if you ever want to look up a trial other than family court, you can look up any trial and get all the little notes. You can get everything that's said there and look that up as part of case law, and that is public information. Also, you're allowed to have witnesses on your behalf speak for you and in your defense, and that is permissible as well. And of course, the most famous, and goes along with your Miranda rights, is your right to an attorney. Remember, part of due process was a fair trial, and the Supreme Court decided that if you are not given an adequate representation, then you are not being given a fair trial, so you do have the right to an attorney. And if you can't afford one, obviously, you will have a chance for a public defender. Public defenders are very good attorneys, especially in Montgomery County. They're very sharp. Don't buy the movie myth that they're all bumbling fools. They're not. Many of them are very, very good. And depending on how much money you make is a percentage of how much that they're going to charge you for that attorney to spend some time on your case. Now, the only difference between the public and private attorney, the public attorney is the public defenders probably representing about 10, 15 cases at a time, where that private attorney is probably only representing you. So that private attorney can focus more on your case than the public defender. But as far as attorney-wise, no, they're probably both very, very good and very, very good at what they do. A case to represent the Sixth Amendment, of course, is the case of Gideon versus Wainwright, and there's a movie called Gideon's Trumpet all about this case. And in this case, this man was too poor to have one. Florida at 1963 said, no, you cannot have an attorney because it's not a death penalty case, but the Supreme Court said otherwise. Again, and this is where you get an attorney appointed to you to make that trial fair. Jumping on to the Eighth Amendment. Now we've moved on from the idea of the courtroom to criminal punishment. And what this prevents the government from doing is giving you any excessive, cruel and unusual punishment, or excessive punishment. So the government cannot use excessive force. Obviously, this is where the death penalty becomes controversial. That's about as excessive as you can get. Excessive prison sentences. So most states have a time period, a minimum, maximum of how much someone can spend in jail for a particular crime. The judge cannot exceed that by state law. Excessive fines, same thing. You can't be, get a speeding ticket, go to the courtroom, and the judge goes, oh, I don't like you, $10,000. No, it doesn't work like that. It's there's a maximum amount for that particular punishment. Same thing with bail. Bail, with all of these fit. We have state laws now that all of these fit for whatever crime has been done. Obviously, the death penalty being the most controversial. Is it considered cruel and unusual? Well, for the Founding Fathers, it wasn't considered to be cruel and unusual, believe it or not. And you can even argue today, sentencing somebody to life in jail without a chance of parole, telling them we're going to spend the rest of their life in an 8x8 room, could constitute, with a good constitutional lawyer, cruel and unusual punishment. And then what do you do with criminals? Well, that's not what I'm here to debate today, and nor do I want to. That's a very difficult topic. Is the death penalty? Should we or should we not have it? And again, like I've told you most of the year, I can't give you good answers to that. That you'll have to decide for yourself. Many states have outlawed the death penalty, and like I said, don't be surprised one day that you see, maybe before the end of my lifetime, but probably certainly before yours, that life in jail without a chance of parole is considered to be cruel and unusual punishment. And where do we go from there? I don't know. And finally, we get to the 14th Amendment. Now, we've talked a lot about the 14th Amendment throughout the year. Notice we have all these people here. I always make the game of what all these people have in common. Well, they're people. And the law has equal protection under the law for all citizens. It's one of the few times that we don't see race and gender and age as an issue is in the courtroom. The courtroom is the fairest place in the world. So if mom and dad argue life's not fair, well, you can always say that the courtroom is, or it is the fairest thing that we have in American government today. And the bottom line is everybody's treated equally under the law, and everybody's given a fair chance to defend themselves, and they can have a lawyer to defend themselves, so that hopefully only the bad guys are going to jail. Does that always happen? No. Unfortunately, we're human beings and we screw things up. The law's not unfair, but people certainly find a way to mess things up. So, well, you've finished government for the year. Congratulations. Woo! Unfortunately, we're not at school. I think you guys would have a better chance of passing the American citizenship test the second time around than you did the first time in the beginning of the year. Next week, when we talk again, we'll start talking about some economics, and based on your request, we'll talk about some practical economics, including things like credit cards, what's on your paycheck, writing a budget, maybe a few other things. So we're going to finish the year with some practical things that you should learn, I think, before you get out of high school, and many of you have requested that. So I'm trying to aim something that's geared toward that. Until next week, have a good week. Don't forget your homework due on Friday, the 24th, 5 o'clock. So I don't want anybody complaining this time. Please send it in on the Google Classwork so it's all in on one place. It's not all over the place. Period 3, I am trying to catch up on your work. And enjoy your week.